Good Friday morning. I'm Stephen Romo.
And I'm Zinclea Samoa. Joe and Savannah are on assignment. Right now on Morning News Now, escalation. Breaking news, a barrage of rocket fire in the Middle East. Early this morning, Israel launched strikes in Lebanon and Gaza just hours after Palestinian militants fired rockets into Israeli territory. All of this during Passover celebrations, Good Friday, and the holy month of Ramadan. We'll bring you the latest. Also this morning, April showers. Millions of Americans waking up to more wet weather as a storm system that devastated the Midwest and South now makes its way along the Gulf Coast. We're tracking the conditions this morning and how they could impact your travel plans on this busy holiday weekend. Tension in Tennessee. This morning, after an historic vote in the House chamber, state Republicans expelled 2 of 3 Democrats over their role in anti-gun protests.
This is just the beginning. That when they expelled us, it wasn't about us individually. It was an attempt to expel and silence a movement.
We have more on the vote as the fallout grows, and he's flipping the script. Actor Frankie Grande has already won the hearts of the millions of people who follow him online. Now he's starring in a new movie with an entirely LGBTQ plus cast and crew. His conversation with our very own Joe Fryer about the importance of representation on and off the screen. We'd love to see it.
Very cool. Yeah, he's so joyful. Love that.
Yes, and it's been a long week. Thanks for sticking with us. We begin this morning with breaking news out of the Middle East and the escalating tensions there.
Yeah, early this morning, Israel launched more airstrikes in the Gaza Strip, along with strikes on targets in southern Lebanon. The attacks in Lebanon were reportedly in response to rocket attacks on Israel yesterday from militants in that region. Meanwhile, the attacks on Israel from Gaza are showing no signs of letting up. The ongoing violence between Israelis comes during one of the holiest times of the year for people of Jewish, Muslim, and Christian faiths. NBC News foreign correspondent Raf Sanchez brings us the latest from Jerusalem.
Zinclea, Stephen, the violence started this week at the Al-Aqsa Mosque complex here in Jerusalem, but it didn't stop here. And this morning, this chaotic situation is spreading across the region from Lebanon to Gaza to the occupied West Bank. Just breaking it down, this morning, the Israeli military says 2 Israeli women were shot dead in the West Bank. A major manhunt is now underway for the shooter. And this coming after Israeli jets pounded targets in Gaza and unusually in southern Lebanon overnight. They were hitting facilities belonging to the Hamas militant group, which Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says was responsible for this barrage of rocket fire we saw from southern Lebanon into Israel on Thursday. Now, 34 rockets were fired, 25 of them were intercepted, but this was the largest barrage we have seen since the 2006 war between Israel and the Lebanese militant group Hezbollah. Now, Hamas is a Palestinian group. It controls Gaza, but it does also operate inside of Lebanon. And the Israelis, when they were carrying out these strikes, were trying to find a balance between going after these Palestinian groups like Hamas without triggering a full-scale war with Hezbollah like the one in 2006, which was so devastating. Now, you can hear behind me, Muslim worshippers are back at the mosque for Friday prayers. We're in the middle of Ramadan here. But on Wednesday, Israeli forces stormed inside this holy site, the 3rd holiest site in Islam, and videos of Israeli riot police beating Palestinians with guns and nightsticks, sparking fury all across the Muslim world. Israeli police say they had no choice but to go in after extremists barricaded themselves inside the mosque. They were stockpiling rocks and fireworks. So a very volatile situation here all across the Holy Land as we head into this Easter weekend. Guys.
Raf Sanchez, thanks so much.
Well, the severe weather this week has affected millions of people across the United States. Today's threat of another round of severe weather comes as people continue to clean up after the rain and tornadoes earlier this week in the Midwest and the Southeast caused widespread damage. This damage from Missouri was caused by an EF2 tornado early Wednesday that had peak winds of 130 miles per hour. 5 people were killed. Several others were injured there. Parts of Kentucky also faced the brunt this past week of severe weather. These lingering April showers could potentially affect those traveling this weekend for Passover and Easter.
But we're going to actually get to our very own Michelle Grossman with a check at your Morning News Now weather. Michelle, good morning.
Good morning to you both. So good to see you. And here's the good news. We're going to get a break from those severe thunderstorms. Any tornado risk is low today. It's going to be low over the next several days. We're starting seeing the indication of a pattern change, which makes it a little quieter. That's really needed, really good news. But we're starting out very soggy in some spots, and flooding conditions are a concern today. So we're looking at flood alerts. Where you see this green here, that is a flood alert. We've seen flash flood warnings over the past few hours. We're certainly going to see them as we go throughout this Friday. That's because we have a lot of rain falling along a frontal boundary. It's that same boundary we've been watching all week. It's the same boundary that brought on the severe weather earlier this week. But now we're just seeing some heavy rain. You do see some lightning here. That's pulling that moisture off the Gulf. It's giving them that oomph or that energy to these storms. But we're not expecting severe storms. We could see some stronger thunderstorms, but not severe storms as we go throughout this Friday. The main concern is heavy rain over the next couple of days. We're looking at brighter colors, the reds, the oranges, the yellows. That's where we're seeing the brightest colors, and that's where we're seeing the heaviest rain. So as we go throughout the next couple of days, today we're looking at that cold front sinking to the south and also to the east. You notice these colors. This is a stationary front, so it's nearly stationary. It's moving very slowly, and that's creating the problem of those showers and storms riding along this front. That's what we're going to be watching. So a flood watch from East Texas into Louisiana. Then as we get towards tomorrow, notice it doesn't move very far. Still some very bright colors now into the Carolinas, where you see the yellows, reds, oranges. That's where we're seeing the heaviest rain falling. We're looking at the Florida Panhandle to the Carolinas. That's where we're seeing that flood risk as we go throughout tomorrow. Now, as we see the rainfall rates, we're looking at rainfall rates of locally up to 5 inches of rain. The oranges, the yellows into the Carolinas, even portions of the New Orleans, we're seeing some heavy rain as well. Today, we're looking at a flood risk. Then back to the west, we're looking at rain and snow in the Pacific Northwest.
Wow, we're saying April showers, but it's a lot more than showers coming out.
It is downpours, heavy rain, flood alert. So that's dangerous when you're driving, because flooding is the #1 killer in the weather world.
Yeah. People stay safe. Michelle Grossman, thank you.
Sure.
And turning now to a new report raising serious ethical questions for Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. The article released by ProPublica says that Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas accepted luxury trips from conservative billionaire and Republican donor Harlan Crow. According to the report, Thomas, quote, has accepted luxury trips virtually every year from the Dallas businessman without disclosing them. NBC News has not been able to independently verify this reporting. Joining us now to discuss is NBC News Supreme Court reporter Lawrence Hurley. Lawrence, good morning. So first off, what are some of the key takeaways from the report and the ethical concerns that are being raised? What exactly are those?
There's two sort of different issues here. One is the fact that these previously undisclosed trips, were cost a lot of money and went on for a long time, and no one knew anything about this. The second question is, whether there was an actual breach of the ethics rules that judges have, which is the question of whether Justice Thomas was required to disclose these trips on his annual reports that they have to issue. And that question is sort of debated. But the broader question is it acceptable for a justice to accept these kind of trips anyway, whether or not they're allowed? And that's a sort of broader question that isn't really covered by these ethics rules.
Lawrence, I wanted to touch on that because there has been growing pressure for the Supreme Court to adopt a code of ethics. They've been making a lot of headlines, and it's not for their rulings, but a lot of ethics concerns, as we're discussing. They say they tend to follow the code of conduct that judges for lower courts follow. But these trips that ProPublica unveiled are now being debated about whether or not they're in violation of that code. What can you tell us about that? And if they are a violation, Thomas's trips, could he actually see repercussions for that?
Yeah, so actually up until like a month ago, it was really unclear what kind of exemptions there are for justices when they're reporting about trips involving personal hospitality, which is like basically when they're going to stay with their friends, going out for dinner, that type of thing. And it seems like there was a sort of a big loophole here where, things like private travel and staying at private resorts didn't necessarily have to be disclosed. And there's a lot of debate over that going on right now between ethics experts. Some think it should have been reported, some say it shouldn't. But the rules were just tweaked last month. And so now going forward, it's very clear that they do have to be disclosed. But that hasn't stopped the debate in Congress, where a lot of lawmakers, including the chairman of the Judiciary Committee in the Senate, are pushing for the court to adopt the same or similar code of ethics that lower court judges have to follow. And that would really sort of tighten things up, although even then there are questions about whether that could be enforceable because of separation of powers concerns.
And Lawrence, briefly here, has anyone involved, Justice Thomas, the Supreme Court, or Harlan Crow, actually responded to this report?
The court has not said anything. Justice Thomas hasn't said anything. Harlan Crow has put out a statement saying that it's a friendship with Justice Thomas, purely and simple. He's never tried to influence anything that the justice has done, and he's kind of saying this was just personal hospitality, and it was perfectly okay.
A lot to watch here from the Supreme Court. Lawrence Hurley, thank you so much. And back here in New York, House Republicans are escalating their probe into the Manhattan District Attorney's prosecution of former President Donald Trump.
House Judiciary Chairman Jim Jordan issued a subpoena to Mark Pomerantz, a former Manhattan prosecutor who previously led the investigation into Trump's finances before he resigned last year. In a letter accompanying the subpoena, Jordan said that Pomerantz's previous role in the DA's office makes him uniquely situated to provide information that is relevant and necessary to the committee's investigation into Alvin Bragg's prosecution of Mr. Trump. For more on this, let's bring in NBC News correspondent Dasha Burns in West Palm Beach, Florida, as well as NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos, who joins us here in studio. Good morning to you both. And Dasha, let's start with you. How is the Manhattan's DA's office responding to this subpoena, and are we expecting that Pomerantz will actually appear?
Well, Stephen, the tensions here clearly escalating. Yesterday, DA Bragg posting a pretty heated response to House Republicans, saying in a statement posted on Twitter that the House GOP continues to attempt to undermine an active investigation, an ongoing New York criminal case with an unprecedented campaign of harassment and intimidation. Repeated efforts to weaken state and local law enforcement actions are an abuse of power and will not deter us from our duty to uphold the law. These elected officials would better serve their constituents and the country and fulfill their oath of office by doing their jobs in Congress and not intruding on the sovereignty of the state of New York by interfering in an ongoing criminal matter in the state court. And by the way, House Republicans have also asked Alvin Bragg to testify as well, which he has refused to do. I expect the back and forth is going to continue here, guys.
All right, so Danny, let's bring you in because this subpoena would require Pomerantz, who is a former Manhattan prosecutor, to testify on an ongoing investigation. Is that an ethics issue? Is that even possible?
It depends on your imagination, and this is what I mean by that. Congress can investigate on anything upon which federal legislation could be had. So, for example, if they said, hey, DA's office, we want to take over your investigation. We don't think your investigation is proper. That would not really be a proper purpose for legislation. But now, watch this trick. Instead, they say, well, we want to explore possible federal legislation that would protect presidents and former presidents in the future from state prosecution. And voila, now you may have a legitimate area of inquiry for federal legislation, because federal legislation may be had in the modern era with the expanded Commerce Clause on almost anything at all the federal legislation and regulations may touch. So it could be enforceable for that reason alone. The real question is, do they want to subpoena Mark Pomerantz? The man wrote a book essentially indicting Donald Trump. The man is very smart. He's experienced. This is not someone you want to let loose during a high-profile question and answer session before Congress. This could totally blow up in their faces.
Especially one that everyone's watching.
Yeah, sounds like some fireworks could happen there. Dasha, I wanted to ask you about more developments in that New York case. The judge who's presiding over the criminal case appears to have donated a small amount, just $15, to President Biden's 2020 campaign. So what do we know about that and the potential fallout it could bring?
Yeah, so here is what we know. FEC reports show that a Juan Merchan, who lists his occupation as a New York judge, donated $15 to the Biden campaign in July of 2020. Also in that same month, he donated $10 to a group called Stop Republicans and $10 to another group called Progressive Turnout Project. Now, we reached out to the court and to the judge to confirm that donation and to comment. We have not yet heard back. Look, of course, this opens the door for the former president and his allies to once again go after this judge, to continue their attacks, calling this judge biased. This adds fuel to that fire. Look, we were waiting to see whether or not the former president would turn down his rhetoric after the judge told everyone in the case to sort of tone it down. He did not. I expect that this will only raise the heat here as this really gives an opening for the former president to do that, guys.
And Danny, let's bring you back in because it seems ethics is the theme of today. The judge making a donation, that's not necessarily unprecedented, but the reality is former President Trump running for office. There is a chance he goes against Biden. What are the ethical concerns here, briefly?
We need to be careful that we don't exclude or consider people biased in the Trump prosecution simply because they may have voted for Joe Biden or voted for Trump. The fact that we hope that everybody in the country votes, it shouldn't disqualify them from being fair and impartial. And let's get real. This is a large city, the largest city, and the reality is judges in large cities are mostly Democrat. That's the way it is in Philadelphia, where I spent many, many, many years. I can't think of a non-Democrat judge in that county, just to give you an idea. So it's not that surprising that this case was assigned to a Democratic judge, and it's not going to disqualify him, especially because he gave $15. Not a big deal.
Certainly more ammo for the Trump campaign. All right, Danny Savalos, Dasha Burns, thank you both.
Turning now to another political controversy, this one unfolding in Tennessee. The Republican-led state house expelled 2 Democrats who are black from office just yesterday after they participated in last week's anti-gun protests following the mass shooting at a Nashville elementary school. There were not enough votes to expel a 3rd Democrat, Gloria Johnson, who is white. Hundreds of protesters descended on the state Capitol building to voice their objections to the vote. Take a listen. The Tennessee House has only expelled members 3 times in its history. Those members were removed for contempt, bribery, and sexual misconduct. Democrats say this move will only cause more division in the state. So let's bring in NBC News correspondent Priscilla Thompson in Nashville for more. Priscilla, good morning. So can you just walk us through what happened at this hearing yesterday? I know you were deep on the ground there. What reason did House Republicans use to have 2 of 3 Democrats removed from office, especially given the optics aren't great? 2 expelled were black. The one who was not is white. How was the scene? What's the assessment?
Yeah, Zinclay, it was an incredibly emotionally charged day. You saw those demonstrators that showed up bright and early in the morning and chanted for hours, filled the gallery as the legislature went about its day until finally those votes came to the floor. And Republicans have said that they brought these resolutions for expulsion after those Democrats joined in on protests calling for gun reform last week. And they took to the House floor with a bullhorn demanding that change. And Republicans said that it brought disorder to the House floor and dishonor to the House of Representations, which is why they called for that vote. Each of those 3 Democrats had an opportunity to defend themselves for about 20 minutes on the House floor. They took questions from their colleagues before those votes were ultimately called. And in a House with a Republican supermajority, what we saw is that 2 of those lawmakers, Representatives Justin Pearson and Justin Jones, both black men, were expelled, while a 3rd lawmaker, Gloria Johnson, a white woman, was not. And certainly many questions about why exactly that happened today. Zinclay?
And Priscilla, I know just moments after the vote came down, Gloria Johnson, who you just referenced, actually responded to the state legislature's decision to not expel her. So first, let's take a listen.
Why do you feel like there was a difference in the outcome between you and your colleague?
I will answer your question. It might have to do with the color of our skin.
Strong words there. So are there concerns this decision will lead to further division in the state? What are we hearing from other Democrats about this expulsion?
Zinclay, that is absolutely a concern. We heard what Gloria Johnson just said was echoed in my conversations with Representative Jones as well. He called this a political lynching, saying that that is what we witnessed yesterday. We heard that among demonstrators as well. Now, Republicans did hold a press conference and respond to that allegation later in the night yesterday, saying that they did not consider ethnicity or view ethnicity in any of this. But certainly this is sparking outrage both here in Tennessee and also across the nation. We saw President Biden tweeting about this overnight, saying it's shocking, undemocratic, and without precedent. Former President Barack Obama also weighing in, saying that no elected officials should lose their job simply for raising their voice, and perhaps the strongest condemnation coming from the Congressional Black Caucus that said this expulsion, quote, makes clear that racism is alive and well in Tennessee. So certainly a conversation that is likely to continue to happen here and around the country. Clay.
So, Priscilla, briefly here, what happens next? Can these two lawmakers who were expelled run for office again, and what happens to their seats?
Yes, they can run for office again. So in the interim, their respective counties will appoint an interim representative until a special election can be held, at which point these lawmakers could run for their seats again and potentially be reelected. And I will tell you that Nashville's mayor tweeted overnight that the city council plans to hold a meeting on Monday, and they could decide to send Representative Justin Jones back to the House to fill his seat in the interim until that special election. Sinclair?
All eyes on Tennessee. Priscilla Thompson, thanks so much.
Well, still ahead on Morning News Now, pointing the finger. Up next, the new White House report blaming the Trump administration for the chaotic U.S. exit from Afghanistan.
Also, international tensions are growing over a controversial meeting between U.S. delegates and Taiwan officials. We'll bring you the latest when we come back.
We're back now with a new report out that outlines the moments that led up to the chaotic U.S. exit from Afghanistan back in 2020. The 12-page report released by the National Security Council lays the blame on former President Trump and his administration. It says decisions made while Trump was in the White House were a major reason why chaos unfolded during the evacuation process in Kabul when Biden took over the presidency. National Security Council spokesman John Kirby explained during a White House press briefing yesterday. Let's listen.
You got to look at when he came into office, what he was walking into. He didn't negotiate with the Taliban. He didn't invite the Taliban to Camp David. He didn't release 5,000 prisoners. He didn't reduce force levels in Afghanistan to 2,500. And he didn't have an arrangement with the Taliban that they won't attack our troops. He came in with a certain set of circumstances. He had no ability to change. He had to deal with it based on what he inherited.
The Taliban has remained in control of Afghanistan since the withdrawal 2 years ago, plunging the country into a humanitarian crisis. NBC News White House correspondent Ali Rafa joins us now for more on this new report. Ali, good morning to you. So walk us through this report. What's the basis here for the Biden administration to place so much of this blame on the previous administration?
Yeah, Stephen, good morning. We heard John Kirby in that briefing yesterday make a clear distinction between two things: who he says is responsible for how chaotic this withdrawal of U.S. troops was from Afghanistan and who is to blame for it. Kirby saying that the president, as commander-in-chief when it happened, does take full responsibility for it. He defended his decision, saying that President Biden is still proud of his decision to remove those troops, but he laid the blame for how chaotic the withdrawal was at the Trump administration's feet. Take a listen to a bit of what he had to say in that briefing yesterday.
The president's transition team asked to see plans for that removal. They asked to see plans for a security transition to the Afghan government. And they asked to see plans to increase the processing of special immigrant visas. None were forthcoming. Transitions matter. That's the first lesson learned here.
Kirby saying that, among other things, the Biden administration inherited an unrealistic timeline that the Trump administration agreed to with the Taliban to remove those troops from Afghanistan. And he said that those plans, whatever plans the Trump administration had agreed to, were not shared with the Biden administration in that transition process.
And Ali, I remember during the withdrawal there was so much confusion, so much chaos of Afghans who assisted American forces trying to get them out as well. This visa program for Afghans, the report says it is, quote, in bad shape. What happened to all those applicants that were left behind and who were trying to get out?
Yeah, that special immigrant visa program was really the golden ticket for these Afghan fixers, translators, contractors, people who had helped U.S. forces on the ground in Afghanistan for the 20 years that they had a presence there. We know that many of them were able to be removed during this withdrawal, but there are still hundreds, if not thousands, that continue to live in hiding in Afghanistan from the Taliban, who are still in that backlogged SIV applicant process. To aid in that process, the Biden administration introduced the Afghan Adjustment Act. That's something that was introduced during the last Congress. It has to be reintroduced to be able to be voted on, possibly passed and signed into law. That's something that still hasn't happened yet in this new Congress, and it's still unclear whether there's actually even an appetite for that to be reintroduced. Kirby, in that briefing yesterday, again stressed that the importance of this program and saying that Congress should indeed re-up this and pass it as soon as possible.
All right, more to come on that. Ali Rafa, thanks so much.
Turning now to a story we've been following throughout the week, the growing tensions between the U.S. and China over the United States' relations with Taiwan. Despite continued threats from China, a bipartisan group of top U.S. delegates met with Taiwanese officials. This follows a meeting earlier this week between House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and Taiwan's president here in the U.S. NBC News foreign correspondent Janice Mackey-Frayer joins us now from Beijing to dig in. So, Janice, it's been a busy week, and I know there's been so much back and forth. So can you just give us an overview of just what happened on this issue throughout the week?
Well, it's been a busy week on many fronts around that meeting that happened in California between Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. For days leading up to that meeting, there were threats from China. There was condemnation from China, and there was the expectation that there would be some sort of follow-through, like military drills, the kind that we saw after Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan last summer. So far, the response has been somewhat muted. There was the announcement today from the Chinese Foreign Ministry that they are sanctioning the Reagan Library, the Hudson Institute, and 4 individuals, as well as the de facto ambassador to the U.S. of Taiwan, for their involvement in what Chinese state media here has been calling a sneaky meeting. But in terms of the bigger, massive military response, that could still come. We're not seeing signs of it yet. There are drills happening in the Taiwan Strait and around the island, but they're more along the lines of the gray zone tactics that we've seen for a while, as opposed to a real show of force.
And Janice, as you outlined, the reality is these meetings have happened. So where do tensions now stand between the U.S. and China?
Well, I think it's also important to remember the context in which the meeting happened in California. At the same time, there was a diplomatic frenzy happening here, and as well, there was the U.S. delegation that was arriving to Taiwan and having meetings there. The delegation is expected to meet with President Tsai when she returns to Taiwan this weekend. But here in Beijing, they seem to be changing tact. China is trying to position itself as more of a diplomatic power player. France's President Emmanuel Macron has been here for a state visit, so that likely played into the restraint. But over the past few weeks, we have seen several high-profile delegations come through town. The leaders of Germany, Spain, Brazil, foreign ministers from Japan and New Zealand, as well as the foreign ministers of Saudi Arabia and Iran having that historic handshake yesterday. You boil that all down, and it puts into context that China is also looking to shore up ties with Europe. Europe is important for trade and important for China right now as relations with the U.S. continue to deteriorate. There are no high-level communications happening between the U.S. and China, and there are no talks happening on any of the issues, even the ones they have in common. And as always, Taiwan remains a flashpoint in the relationship.
A lot to watch. Janice Mackey-Frayer, thank you so much. And coming up, the battle over abortion rights is raging on in several states. Nearly 10 months after the end of Roe v. Wade, we'll tell you about the new controversial laws passed just this week.
And cancerous chemicals detected in an area where hundreds of kids go to school. The NBC News investigation is prompting federal officials to take action. That's next on Morning News Now.
We're back now with a look at what's been a major week for both sides of the abortion battle. NBC News correspondent Blaine Alexander takes a look at some major changes that are coming to 4 states.
It's been nearly 10 months since the end of Roe v. Wade and the beginning of abortion access falling solely under state control, with major developments in 4 states this week. In Idaho, the governor signed a controversial new law making it a felony for non-parent adults to help a minor cross state lines for an abortion, the first law of its kind nationwide. Planned Parenthood is slamming the measure as extreme, saying it will put young people in dangerous and isolating situations.
What would you say to critics who call this unnecessarily cruel?
I think, again, it's important that we protect the life of the unborn child. When it comes to minors, what the legislation requires is that parents essentially be informed.
In Florida, protests and arrests after the state Senate passed the so-called Heartbeat Protection Act, reducing abortion access from 15 weeks to 6.
If you vote for this ban, things will get worse. Women will die.
For 50 years, the killing of innocent children has been legal. Legal does not equate to right.
It all comes amid a pair of victories for abortion rights advocates. In Michigan, Governor Gretchen Whitmer signed a repeal of the state's abortion ban on the books since 1931.
Abortion rights are now enshrined into our state constitution.
And in Wisconsin, abortion was at the heart of Tuesday's high-stakes election for a seat on the state Supreme Court, now set to be filled by the liberal candidate, all but ensuring abortion access in the state.
Wisconsin voters have made their voices heard.
Yes. Several more states are considering legislation that would either expand or restrict access to abortions. Blaine Alexander, NBC News.
Now to a story NBC News first reported 3 weeks ago about an elementary school in Reserve, Louisiana, located next to a plant emitting tons of what the EPA has said as a chloroprene. It's a dangerous carcinogen. NBC News senior investigative and legal correspondent Cynthia McFadden returned to Reserve, located in part of the state dubbed Cancer Alley, where the risk for developing cancer is 7 times higher than the national average. But she wasn't alone. This time, she was with the head of the EPA, who's now taking action.
We return here to the 5th Ward Elementary School in Reserve, Louisiana. We'd been here a couple weeks ago to tell the story of a plant that's almost on the fence line that has, according to the EPA, been emitting likely carcinogens into the air. We came back with the head of the EPA to find out what he intends to do about it.
Our work isn't done.
18 months ago, the newly appointed head of the EPA, Michael Regan, took what he called a journey to justice tour that brought him here.
I vowed that EPA would take action.
He returned to make good on that promise, proposing a staggering slate of emission standards for 80 toxic chemicals.
We're setting a safety standard that we believe is the lowest you can set that is detectable with technology,
including chemicals being emitted from the Denker plant here in Reserve.
Hi!
On our last visit here, we met George and his great-grandmother, Mary Hampton, who's been battling for years to get the Denker plant next door to George's elementary school to stop emitting what the EPA has long said are unsafe levels of 2 of those toxic chemicals.
One of your neighbors says it's like sending the kids to a gas chamber.
Exactly. Exactly. We also met Robert Taylor, who'd been fighting with her for years. He didn't have much confidence the EPA would do anything. So when the agency called the night our story aired and suggested we meet up with Michael Regan in Louisiana, we agreed.
One of the things that Mr. Taylor said to me the first time I came to visit was that this was a sacrifice zone.
What I can tell you is there are none of these facilities in Beverly Hills. There's no coincidence. If you look at who's on the front lines, most of these individuals are black, brown, or tribal, and or low income. So there's a consistent pattern here.
If the new standards announced are put into effect, they become much more enforceable.
I think what angers a lot of people is, though, the Denka plant has been admitting at these historically high levels for years now. Why not shut the plant down while everything else is being sorted out?
We are using every tool in our toolbox. And if I have more powers, trust me, I would use them.
Denka told us it's reduced emissions and says it's breaking no laws, denying it's putting the folks who live here at any increased risk for cancer.
I wish that we could move more expeditiously to take action to protect George, to protect Mr. Taylor, to do all the things that we want to do yesterday.
As for Bob and Mary, they said,
we got the attention of our politicians.
It's not over.
It's not over, but we'll be here when it ends. I tell them all the time, I was here from day one, I'll be there till day zero.
Cynthia McFadden, NBC News, Reserve, Louisiana.
Really important reporting, Cynthia. Thank you for bringing us that. And coming up, some good news for frequent flyers. When we come back, the new move by the TSA aimed at getting you through the airport quicker.
Plus, generational differences in the workplace. We'll talk about why some bosses are preferring older employees. That's next on Morning News Now. We're back now with a story for all of you frequent flyers out there.
That's right. The U.S. Transportation Security Administration is expected to issue a single application for travelers to apply for TSA PreCheck and Clear. We're joined now by Katie Nastro, a travel expert who's here to help explain what these changes mean for you as you make your way through airport security, a process no one really likes doing. No. So, Katie, thank you for being with us. Can you first just explain for those unfamiliar the difference between TSA PreCheck and Clear and how they work when you arrive at the airport?
So essentially, both programs help to expedite the security screening process, but they are different. And basically, PreCheck allows for a separate, more seamless security experience, typically less wait time, where Clear is privately owned and the documents are verified by a separate kiosk. And then you're able to bypass the waiting in the security line, similar to a fast pass at an amusement park where you get to go to the head of the line. But both are not taking away security screening altogether. They're just making the process a bit quicker.
So, Katie, with both those programs, you still have to physically go through security. So then why would someone sign up for one program or the other here?
Well, basically, the two programs allow you to have less stress, go through that security screening process a bit quicker. And, you know, for $78, TSA PreCheck is good for 5 years. It makes it so you can have a dedicated security line, not take off your shoes, your belts, take out your laptops, all of the such, as well as Clear is free for kids traveling under 18 with a parent that has Clear. And it's established in entertainment venues as well as some stadiums across the country. So there are other benefits to having both programs.
And that's helpful to know that the benefits go beyond the airport. And I know Clear also really relies on biometric data, Katie. So is there a benefit to having both? And ultimately, though, is it going to slow down both lines, or do you think it'll be speeding it up?
Well, anything to help the process is a win in my book. And so if you're an avid traveler who wants to maximize their chance of getting through the whole process a little bit smoother, a little bit quicker, consider both programs. But from a cost standpoint, TSA PreCheck at $78 for 5 years, that's only about $15 a year. Even if you travel once, that's money well spent. And a lot of credit cards, even if you go for one versus the other, will actually reimburse you for each of the memberships. So that's definitely something to consider as well.
Ooh, a pro tip I didn't know about. I should go and get that done.
And Sinclair knows everything about travel.
We travel a lot. We travel a lot. Katie, thank you so much.
I love that. Thank you.
And now we're going to turn to a look at hiring practices in the workplace. And the question, do older employees work harder? According to one report, some employers seem to think so.
Yeah, the article in the Wall Street Journal, Bosses Want Hard Workers, so they're hiring older people, found that, quote, some companies are recruiting seniors on the premise that age equals a stronger work ethic. Pretty interesting. Careers columnist for the Wall Street Journal, Callum Borchers, joins us now to talk about this. Callum, good morning. So walk us through what employers are saying about these older workers and their work ethic compared to younger ones.
Well, what they're finding is that these older workers are of a generation that they just sort of grind. They show up on time. They punch the clock. They give a full effort while they're there. And that may not sound all that novel, but some employers are finding that it's harder to find these days. And of course, I'm generalizing now. A fellow millennial here, Stephen. I mean, I don't like broad sweeping generalizations about younger workers, but this does show up in our polling. I mean, we just did a large scale survey of Americans' values, for example, and what we found was a 14-point gap in the way that people 65 plus rate the importance of hard work for themselves personally versus people 30 and under. This is self-reported data now. So what you find is employers responding to this and saying, hey, if we want to find somebody who is going to really give us a big, strong effort at work, maybe we should consider the 50 plus crowd, which is actually the fastest growing segment of the workforce, it turns out.
And Callum, I'm glad you made that point, right, about not generalizing about generational differences, because that is important. But there have also been reports of ageism. There's a new report out from AARP that actually found that, quote, 78% of older workers, as you touched on, have reported seeing or experiencing age discrimination in the workplace. So what barriers can ageism have for older workers in the workplace? And if they're experiencing it, how can employers and fellow coworkers support them?
Yeah, there's a little doubt. I mean, ageism is not dead, let's be clear. There is still some 13,000 ageism claims filed every year with the EEOC. But keep in mind that number has dropped by 45% since 2011. So we do see a steep decline in age discrimination claims. And if you ask SHRM about this, the Society for Human Resource Management, they say that does represent a real decline in age discrimination. And I'm glad you also brought up the AARP, which for more than a decade now has been asking employers to sign a pledge saying, hey, I'll give workers over 50 a fair shot in hiring practices. And they told me that last year they saw 122% increase in the number of companies taking that pledge, which again to them is a sign that companies are increasingly interested in hiring older workers.
Ageism still a problem, but glad to hear that optimism. So Callum, what is the takeaway here for younger employees? What does this mean? Should their approaches be changing?
Well, I think one thing is just to really stick to the basics in a lot of ways. I mean, when I ask these managers what stands out to you, and they tell me things like, oh, well, so-and-so shift starts at 9 and she shows up at 8:50, that's something that's achievable, right? That's something that you can do. If showing up a few minutes early is going to make a great impression with your boss, do it, right? It's not complicated stuff. Another big thing that came up a lot was not being on your phone during your shift, right? I mean, people want to see bosses now. They want to see people interacting with customers if it's a forward-facing role. So if you can resist and put the device down, they love to see people who are chatting up the customers and having some interpersonal skills. Those sound like little things, but what I hear consistently from managers is that's what really stands out to them right now.
I mean, there have been so many cultural shifts in how we work and where we work, so this is really fascinating stuff.
Yeah, Callum Borchers, thanks so much for breaking that down for us.
Thank you.
Glad to be with you.
And coming up, we're flipping the script. Actor Frankie Grande opens up to our very own Joe Fryer about his latest movie made with an all LGBTQ plus cast and crew.
Exciting stuff. Up next, their conversation about the importance of representation. This is Morning News Now.
Welcome back. For today's Good Talker, we're heading under the sea. If you're planning to sing along to the iconic tunes in the upcoming remake of The Little Mermaid, prepare for some changes. Composer Alan Menken, who also wrote the music for Disney classics like Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin, said he made tweaks to some of the lyrics in The Little Mermaid. Words in two popular songs, Kiss the Girl and Poor Unfortunate Souls, have been adjusted to reflect a more modern take and especially to emphasize consent. Menken has not yet revealed which exact lyrics were changed, so it looks like we'll all just have to wait and see when we're singing along to the movie, which I am so excited.
Yes, super excited about too. Been waiting. I feel like we've heard about it for a couple of years now.
Yes.
Waiting to see
and
that.
And the trailer just moved me to tears.
Oh, yeah.
It's
so
exciting. And continuing with our entertainment coverage, we're going to go to our series Flipping the Script, featuring people on screen, on stage, and behind the scenes, shining a spotlight on diversity.
Yeah, enter Frankie Grande, who's starring in a new indie film hitting the streaming world today. Morning News Now anchor Joe Fryer sat down with Frankie and joins us us now with more. Frankie's just so magnetic.
He really is. He has such a great personality, and this is fun to talk with him. Frankie Grande, he's an actor, he's a singer, a dancer, brother to pop star Ariana Grande, and a member of GLAAD's board of directors. Well, now he's starring in a new movie. It's called Summoning Sylvia. It's both a horror movie and a comedy, because those two things go together. It focuses on the LGBTQ plus community, but has messages that resonate far beyond.
Great, so now that I've warmed up.
What should we know about this movie?
That it's a lot of fun. You know, I just came back from a few screenings of the film, and the audiences are laughing like so uproariously.
What is the main message?
Even though we come from different walks of life, we're all the same. We're all human, and there's a very lovely dynamic that plays out between a very, very gay character and a very, very straight character who don't think that they're going to be able to speak the same language.
You're all gay.
Not to spoil the film, but it turns out okay.
Is it a scary movie? How do you describe it?
Okay, so I say we fall more in the Megan and Cocaine Bear category than, let's say, like a slasher film. Yes, there are spooky moments, and you do feel that tension and that thriller aspect of the film, but predominantly I would say comedy.
Horror movies are usually camp.
Yep.
LGBTQ movies are usually camp.
Yep.
So is this kind of like the perfect marriage?
I think it's the perfect marriage. It is not over the top in a very weird way. It feels very real, and the messages are extremely real.
Both in front of the camera and behind the camera, there's a lot of LGBTQ representation.
Yes. I think it's extremely important for LGBTQ plus characters to be in media in a bigger way. And in this film, you know, the whole leading cast is LGBTQ plus, but again, it doesn't feel like a movie just for gay people. It's a movie for everybody. And I think this is, in this political time, it is very important for those messages to reach the people that are trying to take rights away from us, reach the people that are imposing drag bans on us and trying to take rights away from the transgender community. I think those people need to see these kind of films to understand, like, oh, actually, you know what, I relate to them. They're not scary.
Late last year, Bros was marketed
Yes.
as sort of the first LGBTQ movie by a big studio. It got a lot of marketing, but it didn't do very well at the box office. What was your feeling?
It's disheartening to see a movie like Bros not do well at the box office. But I don't think that we need to back away from this. I think we need to lean in more in order to get LGBTQ plus representation into mainstream media.
I think there's a fear that maybe studios will be a little anxious or hesitant.
Sure.
How do you prevent that from happening?
They just have to continue to take leaps of faith. Not every LGBTQ project is going to be universally appealing, but it's important to know that not all queer content is the same. There's a large variety of what you can get, because one queer film failed doesn't mean that all queer films will fail. It just means that we need to try again. It's not always about box office numbers in terms of success, but I do understand why studios pay attention to box office numbers, because, honey, we know. We all want to be the next Avatar, you know what I'm saying? Everybody does. I want to be the next Avatar. Put me in blue, James Cameron. I'm ready.
What does it mean to be on the GLAAD board?
It's incredible because they're such an unbelievable organization, and I truly believe that media is the most powerful way you can change people's minds on this earth. If we get LGBTQ plus people in Super Bowl commercials next year, like, that would be so huge. So GLAAD is trying to do things like that, getting little moments of representation everywhere so that we can't be ignored, and I think that's going to change a lot of hearts and minds.
Our thanks to Frankie Grande for taking time to talk with us. Summoning Sylvia starts streaming today. It's also showing in a few select theaters around the country. And I hope James Cameron's watching, because I think his next Avatar, he knows exactly who's casting.
I mean, absolutely. I was riveted. I'm ready.
I'm so disappointed. I wanted to see you in blue, Joe.
Right. Well, I've done that. I think Frankie will get cast before I get
and
cast.
talent must run in that family. I mean, Frankie, Ariana, it doesn't stop.
Yeah, and they're both lovely to chat with, too. I've met them both, and so it's fun. I love seeing their dynamic together as well. But I think the conversation, too, was just incredibly important, that he's talking about how there is different queer content, that every movie has to be for every person, but that just creating it and exposing people to it makes a difference. And he says the movie ends with a drag number, which feels fitting for this time right now.
It does.
Absolutely. And no community is a monolith. That's an important observation.
Exactly.
Joe Fryer, thank you so much.
All right, that's going to do it for this hour of Morning News Now.
The news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.